Okay, hi everyone, thanks for coming to this quickie. My name is Pierre Crépieux. I'm an Android developer based in Brittany, in the far west of France, and I work for a mobile network carrier called Orange. Why did I prepare this presentation? As developer, we are used to handle network communication through API, and this is great, but it hides a lot of complexity related to radio communications. I'll try to explain you how it works by investigating the messy romance, I would say, between energy and latency from a mobile device perspective, hence the title. Let's start with the basics. On a wireless network without proper synchronization, a transmitter has to be constantly listening to the radio wave around it, just to figure out if they convey something interesting. To make things a bit even trickier, the laws of physics make things even worse. While the signal strength will decrease according to a linear relationship on the wire, it will be an inverse square law for the radio because the electromagnetic radiations spread out as it travels away. In addition, if many users communicate with the base station at the same time, all users will experience some background noise. Consequently, they have to send at a higher power range to overcome that noise. Moreover, if data is sent faster, the signal power has to be increased. And finally, have in mind that a modem might require something like 2 watt under heavy load, and a typical battery capacity is around 8 watt-hour. It basically means that the radio could empty it within a couple of hours. So the question is, what can be done to mitigate the power consumption of a smartphone? Well, simply shut down the radio. If we were only to upload data, that could be just fine. But we also want to receive unsolicited data, like a phone call or a push notification, so we have to be reachable. This is why DRX has been designed since the early beginning of mobile networks, say 2G. But we will see that along the network evolution, different flavors of DRX has been designed. I focus on the downlink because of the time constraint, actually. And I have to mention that some other kind of optimization are also applied to the uplink direction, and this is called DTX. So this is just to highlight that we are shutting down the radio. First, let's try to have a better understanding of how a network operates. I know that some developers just can't stand network diagram, and I just want to show you that it's not easy, more complex than an application structure. So keep that in mind. And don't be afraid of network diagrams. The network indeed is made of a couple of equipments. There is the node B, which is the cell tower. And you got also a radio network controller that I will talk about later. Some of them in blue are related, oh yeah, the laser doesn't work. Some are related to the circuit switch network. And this is the piece of hardware that are involved in the voice call setup. Some other, in purple, are involved for the packet switch network, like the internet. You might be already familiar, actually, with the GGSN without even knowing. The APN that is set in your device actually points to a GGSN. So, it is nearly impossible to talk about mobile network without mentioning bearers. Think of a bearer as a pipe. As you can guess, the latency doesn't only come from the radio interface. The core network also has a key role and has been improved along the years. The two main bearers that you have to care about are the PDP context, which is where your IP address comes from, and the radio bearers, because obviously those are the ones that will need energy. One last thing, radio bearers rely on channels. Just like any API or protocol, those channels are stacked layers, and namely we will have some logical channel, transport channel, and physical channels. Yeah. One channel that I want to talk about is the paging channel. If my phone is idle, just right in my pocket, and the network has something to deliver, let's say a push notification, for example, there will be a trigger, namely a paging message that will be broadcasted in the cell I am in. And sorry. If we were to constantly monitoring this paging channel, that would drain a lot of battery uselessly. That's why paging messages are broadcasted at a given interval, usually around 1 second, could be half a second, could be 2 seconds, so that the mobile can have opportunity to switch off its receiver. The counterpart is that if an event occurs, you might be awakened up to 1 second later. That's already a good point, but you might be wondering what happened when the device is actively using the network. Did you ever come across this documentation on the Android developer website? Ever wonder why this guy is saying that something as simple as a network request every 15 seconds can keep the mobile radio on continuously? That is because of the RRC. There are many users sharing the same network infrastructures, and operators have to ensure that the network won't get overloaded and collapse. That's why this function is a key element of the access network. It manages the creation and the configuration of radio bearers by means of specific protocol. And you might have guessed that radio resources are rather limited and should be granted sparingly and on purpose. That is the overall role of the RRC. One important concept when it comes to the RRC is its state machine. When you are idle, there is no RRC connection because there are no resources to manage. Your device is periodically monitoring the paging channel that I just talked about a few seconds ago. If you send a network request or if you are paged, you will need a radio bearer. Your model will tell the network it requires one, the RRC will create it, and from now on, the network will manage your state. You will be put in the cell DCH state, and you are set. You have dedicated channels, and you can just throw your traffic on it. But it comes at a cost. When you're in the cell DCH, your device will continuously transmit control information, and it will also have to monitor the data channel. So that will drain a lot of battery, and it will also use a lot of network resources. So the RRC can decide to modify the radio bearer and put you in a self-fetch state, which gives you access to a shared channel, which is much less resource-hungry. As long as only a small amount of data are exchanged, the self-hash state is usually maintained. If the data volume increases again, the network will switch back to cell DCH. If nothing happens, the RRC is likely to put you in the cell PCH. That will once again decrease the power consumption. Just as if you were in the idle state, no resources are assigned, and you're just able to save some energy. If there are some new data, you will be switched back to self-hash, and so on until you are put back to idle. Okay, I talked about the power. What about latency? This is the time that is required to set up your channel, 1 or 2 seconds. I told you the RRC is a control plane protocol. And the 1 or 2 seconds come from this. There is a huge call flow that is involved to set up all these mechanics. Then, what if you're in cell PCH? Something like half a second will be required to recover from cell PCH to cell DCH, because compared to idle state, the network and the mobile device still maintain a connection, and there is no need to repeat the complete call flow that I just showed. Here it is. Still curious to know about the 15 seconds that we just talked about? This is due to tailing periods applied to each of the states. I said that the RRC decides in which state your device should be. It does that by monitoring the traffic and setting timeouts. No traffic for 5 seconds, while in CDCH, you go back to flash. If nothing happened in flash, after 10 seconds, you go back to idle, to cell PCH, and then you go to idle. Those tailing periods are a mean to instantly reuse the resources that were granted without overloading the network signaling. The trick is that those timers are network dependent, so you cannot be sure that it will always be 15 seconds or something else. I talked a lot about 3G, and it's now time to move to 4G. A couple of things have changed. 4G comes with some new technology like, say, MIMO, You have multiple antennae in your phone to be able to reach high-speed data transfer, but once again, it comes at a cost of higher energy consumption. Hence, a new DRX flavor has been introduced. This is the connected DRX. Let's see the difference between 3G and 4G. There are some new equipment. For LTE, you might have noticed the RNC disappeared, and the RRC function that I described moved to the eNode B. It just allows us to lower the latency. SGSN, DGSN became SJW and PJW, and you might also have noticed that I let the 3G network here on the slide, because if you are connected to a 4G network and your device doesn't support VoLTE, you will have to fall back to 3G for voice call. It can have an impact on your application. Obviously, just like 3G, you have plenty of bearer. The PDP context became an EPS bearer, and you still have the radio bearer. The RRC state machine has been somewhat simplified. There are only two states in 4G, connected and idle. In a similar way to 3G, you will switch from idle to connected by getting a radio bearer. And the radio bearer will come with a specific DRX configuration that I'll show you right after. First, you will go in the continuous reception mode that will use a lot of energy, and you will have some short DRX and non-DRX mechanism that will be defined. How are they defined? I'll just go down. Yep. Here it is. They are defined with an on timer, which indicates how long should you listen to the control channel. And they also define cycle length, which can be short cycle or long cycle. And you have here a couple of values that that is possible to find on networks. And one thing to care about with that is that with a fixed on duration, a longer DRX cycle reduces energy consumptions, while increasing the user perceived delay on a shorter DRX cycle reduces the data response delay at the cost of a more energy consumption. There is a trade-off to find out. Okay, all these things are fine for smartphone, but if we are talking about IoT, we have much smaller battery. So how can we increase even more the autonomy of the battery with eDRX? No magic. We will have to increase the timeout that I just shown. The eDRX is twofold concept, connected and idle DRX. And for the eDRX, you will be able to, to have a longer cycle, say 10 seconds, while it was 2 seconds before. And you will also have an opportunity to have a paging windows that will be spaced in the time for, let's say, 10 minutes or even hours. This is a huge improvement from the battery perspective, but while you save energy, you are less reachable than before. If you want even more energy saving, you can switch to PSM. With PSM, you will just shut down the radio for a long period of time. Obviously, this is good for IoT, but for smartphone, this is not applicable. And one thing, because I'm afraid I will run out of time, it should be not confused with Wi-Fi PSM. Wi-Fi obviously has the same problem than 3G or 4G. It for sure provides a continuous reception mode, which is called the CAM, constant awake mode, but in order not to drain the battery, it also has PSM, power saving mode. Basically, the receiver can turn off and will periodically check the traffic indicator map to see if there are some data for the station. If there are, it will wake up and poll it, otherwise it will stay idle. As you can see, the raw mechanism can lead to pretty high latency, because the polling period is something about hundreds of milliseconds. If the terabyte right after the device switches to PSM, you need to wait. But if you compare to 3G and 4G, you can notice that there is no super long tailing period after the data traffic. Of course, there have been some refinement to this mechanism with adaptive PSM to find even better trade-off. But you got the basic idea. Oh, the time is up. I can talk to you about 5G. If you want, you can chase me in the hall. I'll be happy to share some information with you. Thanks a lot for attention.